George Bowen. George. Okay. Ashley Ivy. I know you're here. Here's an old one. Bob Carrick. Is he here today? Old Bob? I guess not.
You gotta be kidding.
I know. Oh, you are here. Okay. It's only 7 years old, Bob. We wanted to make sure that you would stay a good member.
I thought I had it framed.
Ladies, so we're going to have our own Mary Gill Rice as our speaker. And as you know, she was secretary to General Jimmy Doolittle during World War II while he was commander of the 8th Air Force in England. So please get your reservations in and checks as fast as you can to make this planning a little bit easier for Kay. And our last item, I mentioned this before, the annual dues are due now. They're due beginning in January, and we appreciate to get those in as soon as possible. And this does not include members who joined us in September.
Anybody needs a reservation slip? I've got some extra ones.
Okay. John indicated if you don't have a reservation slip or you didn't get one in the mail, he has some over here, and you can get one from him. You can also pay your dues directly before you leave today. Okay. Our speaker today is one of our own, Gerry McDonnell. And in 1994, the 50th anniversary year of the D-Day attack on the Normandy beaches, he wanted to kick off the year with somebody who was there and who could tell it like it was. Gerry was born up in the cold snow country of Buffalo, New York, where he enlisted in the U.S. Navy at age 17. He attended electrician school and amphibious training school, then sailed to Scotland October 1943 on the original Queen Elizabeth as part of a special support group. Assigned to a rocket-firing landing craft, designation was LCTR 447. He was in the advanced assault wave on Normandy on June 6, 1944. He later did the same thing in the invasion of southern France. In November of 1944, surviving that episode, he returned to the United States and was assigned to the Pacific Theater of Operations on another rocket-firing landing craft. The designation was LSMR 408. His unit was headed to islands far out in the Pacific in preparation for the invasion of Japan when the war ended. Gerry then returned to Buffalo to finish his high school and college education. After college, he was firstly a county health inspector and then marketing manager at Heineke Instruments in Hollywood, Florida, and later marketing manager at Fisher Scientific in Pittsburgh. While there, he also taught an American Management Association course, Principles of Professional Salesmanship, all over the country and abroad. After 10 years with Fisher, Gerry went into business for himself, selling replacement parts of forklift trucks, where upon reaching the young age of 65, he turned his business over to his son, Tom. Gerry and wife Lorraine currently reside in East Cobb County and have 4 children and 6, but almost 7 grandchildren. With pleasure, I give you our speaker, Gerry McDonnell.
You know, before the meeting started, someone in the audience came up and said, "Gerry, would you please use a microphone?" He said, "A lot of our members are getting old and have a little bit of a hearing problem." He said, "So it'll be a lot easier on them if you'd use a microphone." And I said, "What?" Incidentally, these are the actual campaign ribbons, replicas of the campaign ribbons. This is the World War II campaign ribbon. Many of you guys can wear the real ones. And the other one is the Victory Medal from World War II. Well, the one is Normandy, the other is the Victory Medal. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about Normandy. Now, keep in mind that I was just swept along in a these things. I had nothing to do, I didn't plan it, I didn't have anything to do with it except to go along. Okay, you can blame the other guys for the other part. Now, I think we'll all agree that the most significant event of the 20th century was World War II. And an important date in that war was June 6th, 1944, which has forevermore been called D-Day. Now, there were many, many D-Days in World War II. That's merely an imaginary term that goes to describing a future event where the actual date is not known, or at least for security reasons, should not be known. The Normandy invasion got the prominence that it did because of its scope, and also because with its success there was no doubt in very many minds as to where the war was going to go and who was going to win. There's a conflict about how many people were involved. Probably in scale it was the largest military operation that there ever was. One report listed as like 2,875,000 people. Now this is preposterous. This very well could have been the number of people that were committed and were in the United Kingdom from all armies ready to go. And again, that was part of it, and they were all there. There's another part that we have to look at, which were the people that were involved in the actual invasion. And even here there's some conflict as to how many there were. The best estimate that we can get was published very recently by the Department of Defense, where they established a criteria for those that were going to get special badges for attending the Normandy festivities this coming June. Now, they said that from the period of 0001 on June 6th until 2399 on that same date, that anyone that was on the ground, in the air, or immediately offshore participating in the invasion would be classified as a D-Day veteran. Now, the best estimate that I can give, the total was about 150,000 people, 150,000 men. Half of them were Americans, a little over half, but for all practical purposes, when you hear someone say they're one of 75,000 people that were involved in the actual invasion. At any rate, I joined the Navy when I was 17. Went to boot camp at Sampson, New York, very cold up there. And from there, why I joined the Navy, I have no idea. I'd never even seen the ocean before. But then I went to boot camp, and then they sent me off to electrician school. And the most complex thing that I had ever done electrically was to screw in a light bulb. So why in the world they would pick me to go to electrician school, I have no idea. At any rate, I went through, it was a 16-week school in Detroit, and I had visions of being on a carrier or a destroyer or a battleship or something like that, a capital ship in the Navy. And indeed, I was scheduled to go on to another service school in Chicago, which was an aviation electrician school, which meant a carrier. The final day of school, they took everyone in our class and sent them to the amphibious forces in Camp Bradford, Virginia. Now, instead of having the nice navy blues and so forth, they gave me an olive drab uniform, 30-30 rifle, combat shoes, and they put me through this very, very rigorous amphibious training. Thank God I never had to use any of it. At any rate, we were there, went through this, and then we went to Boston. We went to the Fargo building in Boston, which was right across from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And we were in there for about somewhere in the neighborhood of a month when we were put on a train and taken to New York. And in the middle of the night, we were put on the Queen Elizabeth, and we sailed for England. Now, this was quite an experience. The Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary, they sailed across the North Atlantic all by themselves, no escort, nothing, just all by themselves. And they made the trip across in 4 days at about 35 knots. Now that's very fast. The theory of them going all by themselves was that no German ship could keep up with them, and they could avoid anybody that was out there. And they changed course every 4 minutes, so that if there was a sub by any chance in their path, they'd pick it up in time to run in the other direction. So they did. The last report I had was that they showed that they transported 450,000 U.S. troops to the United Kingdom in what was called Operation Bolero. This was staging everything in Europe. Now, we were assigned to what was then called the Special Support Group. None of us knew what it was or what it was to do or anything like that, and it was a long time in coming. We arrived in Scotland in the Firth of Clyde, and we docked about 10 miles south of Glasgow, within sight of Brown Shipbuilding, which was where the Queen Elizabeth was built in the first place. There were 15,000 men aboard, which was the most that had been on a ship at one time ever. They had bunks in the swimming pools, and they had every single space was occupied on this ship. There were 2 meals a day and there was a continuous chow line. I was very fortunate. I had a stateroom. The problem was that I had to share it with 12 other guys. At any rate, we arrived at Scotland, and we went to, right there at a place on Clydebank called Roseneath. And we didn't realize it at the time, but this was to be our home for the next 2 or 3 months anyway. And let me tell you that the bonny banks of Clyde are not so bonny in winter. It's cold, and it's rainy, and it's gloomy. But the natives were friendly, and with a name like McDonnell, they accepted me as one of their own, which went a long way. And it was there that I developed an addiction, a lifelong addiction, to their most famous product, Scotch whiskey. Now, Scotch was not easy to come by. These flyboys had driven the price up to $25 a bottle, well beyond the realm that enlisted people could afford. So we had to devise other methods, but we always managed to muddle through. One of the things we were required to carry gas masks, but nobody ever checked in the container to see what was in them. So we would fill it up with all the goodies on the beach, and we'd take it on the base, and then we'd take it into Glasgow, and we could trade. I found the best place to trade was outside of the teacher's distillery. So, I mean, we could work that. My goodness, on the base we'd buy cigarettes for a nickel a pack, 50 cents a carton. Usually Philip Morris, which were pretty bad, but that's what we could get. Then we'd take them in and trade them. And this worked out very well. Well, life on the base there, it was pretty good. I mean, the duty was light. We were just waiting for the ships, and they weren't there. So we played cards, and we went into town, and there was very little else to do. There was a problem that I had, and again, this concerned the competition for the young ladies. I mean, we were healthy young men, and the Scotch lasses were comely, as they say. And there was great competition to get their attentions. Now, we had the goodies, we had the chewing gum, and we had the cigarettes and so forth. There was still competition for these. And just one time I had a very nice-looking young girl with me, and I was in a dance hall on a place called Sucky Hall Street in Glasgow. And I was kind of doing fine with her. And then she danced with one of my friends. And when they came back, she wouldn't speak with me or have anything to do with me. And I couldn't figure out why. And it took me, I mean, I was done, I was dead. Now, the reason was, which I found out later, I was in what's called the Black Gang, which is the engine room force. Now, the engine room force, sailors ordinarily have a stripe on their right shoulder, a white stripe on their right shoulder. The Black Gang has a red red stripe on their left shoulder. So my very good friends had convinced her that the red stripe meant that I had venereal disease. At any rate, we did. And again, we still didn't know what our outfit was or anything like that. And now it started to get known what we were doing. It seems the British had, on a reverse lend-lease basis, they had given 36 landing craft to the Americans, consisting of 3 different types. One had 5-inch guns mounted on it, and this is an LCT, which is, I mean, it's impossible to fire that big a gun off of that little a boat. But their job was to proceed in ahead of the assault wave and duel with the beach batteries. There was another type that was called an LCTF, which was flak, and it had, the whole deck was covered with machine guns, 20 millimeters, 40 millimeters. And the object of these was that if there was air attacks on the beach, that they had these, they could return firepower, in kind right along the water's edge. The third type were these rocket ships that I was on, and they were supposed, theoretically at least, to precede the assault wave into the beach, and then duel with these shore emplacements while the assault troops were getting a foothold on the beach. We'd at least keep their heads down during this very initial and important phase of the invasion. And that's what I was assigned to. Some of the things that I'm going to tell you about this outfit, you might say to yourself, how in the world did we win the war? How in the world could it have happened? There were so many things that well, I want to start with, before I go on, just so that you know it has a happy ending. I brought this. We really did win. Okay? Now, finally, our ships arrived. And these were very, very strange-looking craft. I mean, we had never seen anything like it, nor had anybody else. The deck looked like a sea of pipe organs out on the front. There was, here I've got, there's a few of these. You can just pass out a few of these tables. You see, it looks like a series of pipe organs out on the front of the boat. And these were the firing launches. We'd load them up with rockets. We could put 1,044 5-inch shells out there in those tubes. And we could fire them all in under half a minute. Now that's a lot of firing. Behind this, you can see behind those that there's looks like the shield on a snowplow, on a gigantic snowplow. This was supposed to divert the flames and heat when we fired the rockets. Okay? So ultimately, these ships were delivered from the British. Now, they were brought into the pier and they were immediately decommissioned out of the Royal Navy, and we commissioned it into the United States Navy. The British promptly left without giving us any instructions, any training, anything about these ships. We didn't know how to start the main engines on those things when they left us, and that's the way they left it. These ships were appalling. It was filthy from stem to stern. It was just terrible, the condition the ship was in. But that's what we got, and we had to make do. We scrubbed it from stem to stern before we boarded the ship. The conditions on the ship were, again, primitive. The men slept in hammocks, that were suspended from the bulkhead. They kept their clothes in a sea bag which were kept in a hook on the bulkhead. There was one toilet, and that had a hand-operated pump. There was one pump in the galley so that the cook could wash the dishes. There was no refrigeration. So, yeah, I mean, it was pretty bad. The skipper came through one day. The skipper is an attorney from Illinois. We had, on our whole crew, we had 17 enlisted men and 2 officers on the ship. Not one of them had an ounce of sea duty or anything like that. The skipper came through on the ship one day, and he went down in the crew's quarters, and he saw the pitiable conditions that they were living in. And the deckhand slept forward of the engine room. We in the black gang slept behind the engine room. He came to the engine room, and he found a different story. He found that we had bunks, we had mattresses, we had our own lockers, we had a cupboard that was filled with goodies, and we had, each of us with our bunk, we had a fan and a reading light, and these things that he could never get. And so he called one of my buddies and I up to the captain's quarters. He said, "I've got a problem here." He says, "I'm trying desperately to get all these things." He said, "They won't give me the time of day." He said, "I can't get anything for this ship." He said, "I noticed down in the black gang's quarters that you seem to be pretty well equipped back there." He said, "How do you account for that?" And I said, "Well, we found these things." We found these things. And he said, "You know," he said, "I've got all these requisitions of things that I've been trying desperately to get." He said, "They won't give you the time of day over at Naval Stores. They won't give me anything." He said, "Do you think that you could find some things for us?" And we said, "Why don't you leave these requisitions with us for a few days and we'll see what we can find." Now, over on the base was the Naval Stores. Now, this was a Quonset hut type warehouse, but it was as big as a football field. And it had everything conceivable in there that you needed to run a ship. Everything. And the way it worked was that you could go in and walk in, no problem, and get what you had on your list. Then there was a checkout line similar to what you have in a modern day supermarket that you brought, but you had to have the requisitions, the authorizations for everything you were taking out. So we didn't have any problem. This guy, his name was Kensier from Chicago. He was a young hoodlum. And it matched my background because that's pretty much what I was the poorest kid in a poor neighborhood back in Buffalo, and that's what, I mean, I was a scrounger and he was a scrounger, and we put things together. So we went in and we staged everything we needed, or what we could find that we needed. We put it in an off-of-the-way spot in the warehouse. In examination, we found that there was an Achilles heel in their security system. There was a 24-hour guard on the place, and he roamed the periphery all the time. However, at the back corner, there was an outdoor movie theater, and they ran a movie there nightly. Invariably, the man on guard, with his rifle and so forth, would station himself back at the rear of this place and not work his post. I mean, from the beginning of that movie until the end, he was back there watching the movie. And it didn't matter who the guard was, this is what they did. So we found a window. A window to get in. We also, while we're in there, we took a side window. We took the lock apart, and with a regular pair of dikes, we chipped off 95% of the screw, and then we put it back in, so that it would appear to be locked, but, with just a simple prod of the screwdriver, and the whole thing had come apart. We also realized that with the number of things that we had already spotted that we wanted to take out, that to get them out, we needed a truck. So this means we had to get a truck. Now, for me personally, I couldn't even drive at the time, but my buddy could. So we went back that night, snapped the window open, and I went in and started moving the things into the loading area. Pretty soon, here he comes with the truck. I raise up the door, and he drives inside. We load everything we've got just as quickly as we can. And then the pièce de résistance, there was also a refrigerator there, about 8 foot wide, 6 feet high, and 3 feet deep. With the aid of a chain hoist, we put the refrigerator on the back of the truck, too. And we left and we drove directly to the pier. The crew was standing by. We took everything off in a matter of minutes, put it aboard the ship, and we went to sea, right like that. We were out. And so, I mean, the ship was fairly well equipped. Now, there's a couple interesting things that reports on this that in the book, there's a book, the GI's War, and this is a quote from our flotilla commander, which you'll see how this relates together. The flotilla commander was a Captain Sabin. Problems bedeviled his command from the beginning. His men had been hastily trained in the United States and then shipped to a base in Scotland. Their landing craft were supposed to have been there when they arrived, but not a single one was to be seen. The vessels were so slow in coming that the men despaired. Sabin had to first get the ships, then he had to find the spare parts, which is what I was talking about, then put the crafts in shape, and then train the crews. Virtually every man a landlubber without an ounce of combat experience among them. They had to learn all the elementary lessons of seamanship, piloting, and gunnery. Rocket craft joined up, although the crew had never before handled the vessels, had never before fired a rocket. So this was, the valiant crew that we got aboard. At any rate, we did get aboard, and we did learn to work together and run the ship. There were so many screw-ups that you can't count them. I mean, we crashed into piers, and at one time we were on the Dart River, and being as efficient as we were, our propellers got hooked up with some of these buoys and bent them badly. And there was no room to have them repaired because we're getting close to the invasion. And so what we did was we ran it upriver. The Dart River has a tide of 27 feet, which is 27 feet from high tide to low tide. So we took the ship and we ran it upriver, and we beached it. And then when the tide went out, we went out to take off the propellers and replace them. The problem was that they were stuck on very, very firmly, and we couldn't get them off. By the time we finally got them loose, we didn't have time to put the new ones back on. The tide is coming in. So now the boat raises up as the tide, we're tied off to trees and to everything imaginable. But the boat rises up, and as it approaches high tide, the boat goes back to to where it stopped rising. Now when it turns around, we're coming very, very fast. No screws on the ship now. First the lines ashore, ping, 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 they break. And we're moving faster and faster all the time. We drop the anchor table, ping. Here we go, right down, head foot towards the entire convoy. Well, let me tell you, we did more damage that night than all of the Germans did in the invasion. We really did. I think we hit 8 or 9 ships. So you've got a big steel bow standing out there, and the ship is careening and turning. We're knocking off stanchions that hold the bridge up on one ship. We're gouging another one. We're going, and we're just. But again, this is how the kinds of things that would happen to you. When we got down towards the end of May, and we'd been in every port. We'd been in the Isle of Man, down through the Irish Sea, to Penzance, and every city along the southern coast of England. During this period, got to the end of May, and things were changing more quickly. There were all kinds of nervous energy that was being let out. We still didn't know, at least theoretically, we didn't know what was going on. Now, we got into the first part of June, and they took us ashore and gave every man a booster tetanus shot, which was a pretty good sign that we were getting close. We took a load of ammunition and put it in the racks on the deck, and we took another load and stored it below decks, which again, we had never done this before. A Catholic priest came aboard and heard confessions and distributed communion. Never happened before. And where the real tip-off came was when came aboard what the Navy calls a battle breakfast of steak and eggs. the day when they know in the Navy that you're going into battle, that's breakfast, steak and eggs. The theory, I guess, being that you could sustain it for a long time. But now we knew. An interesting sidelight on this, when our skipper came aboard on about the 2nd of June, must have been, I'm guessing at the date, and I was on the deck, and he's got a whole armful of plans, and he comes by me, and I'd say, when it's apple blossom time in Normandy. Well, he turned white, and 2 minutes later, over the loudspeaker, McDonnell, report to the captain's cabin on the double. I go up and he says, what was that song you were singing? I said, well, Apple Blossom Time in Normandy. He said, why were you singing that? I like it. He says, come on, he said, tell me the truth, why were you singing that? I said, look, Captain, we're the slowest ships in the entire Navy. It only stands to reason that we're going to be the closest to where the action is going to take place. And if I look at the map right across from us is Normandy, we're going to Normandy. He says, you keep your mouth shut and stop singing that goddamn song. It was only about a day later that we were indeed given our mission, our assignment. We were, from where we were to assemble at Poole, which is a nice harborage for landing craft because it's shallow. Big ships can't go in there, but you can put a ton of landing craft in there because they don't have that much draft. We were to assemble at Poole, and we were to lead the entire invasion fleet across the channel to a place, it's 100 miles away, called Virville-sur-Mer on the map, and it had the code name Omaha Beach, section Easy Red. And this was the most heavily defended spot along the Norman coast. Again, we were to proceed in prior to the assault wave. We had very designated targets, and they were fairly far inland, which meant we had to get very close to our rockets only have a range of about a mile, so we had to get very close to the beach to have them in firing range. So all we had to do really was, we got 35 tons of TNT on the deck exposed in these racks, another 35 tons below, and all we really had to do was lead the invasion force across the channel, then go into the most heavily fortified place on the beach and shoot them. Very simple, easy assignment. We did indeed, we went over on June 4th, and we were well beyond the halfway point when the invasion was called off. Because of the sea, it was postponed for a day until June 6th. So we went back to Poole, and that afternoon we again left for, on the invasion. At that time, the south of England was completely sealed off from anything. There was no letters or people or anything that went in this whole band along the English border down there. We had, for example, our signalman to one of the other ships. He signaled over. He turned on the light and signaled over to one of our other craft. Maybe he wanted to borrow a pound of sugar or something. I don't know what he wanted, but he was signaling over, and out of nowhere, this patrol craft came right by, and the guy on the bullheader, he said, "Turn that light out or we'll shoot it out." I mean, they were indeed that strict on the security of it. Even though I was singing Apple Blossom Time in Normandy long before that. On the ship, there was on the bridge was a hut, 2-inch thick steel, and it had slits in it that you could see through. And when we were on a firing run, the skipper could get inside there and close it and control the ship from inside there. In firing the rockets, there were only 5 men involved in the whole procedure. Everybody else on the ship got back and as far away as they could while we were doing this, because for obvious reasons, because it was intense fire and smoke that would come off of these. The 5 men involved were the skipper up in his little hut on the bridge, way down below in the engine room, a man at the throttles, the helmsman, which is halfway down, a radar man. The only luxury we had on the ship was radar. And they did this because the ships could not be, the rockets could not be trained or elevated. They were welded to the deck at an angle of about 45 degrees, as you can see in the picture. Now what this meant was that you had to aim the ship. So you had to get it in a perfect firing position, and then my human error judged the pitch and the toss of the ship when you were on target. They had sent submarines in, and they took what amounted to a radar picture when they were exactly on the target that we should be on when we fire. Then our radar man took this transparency and put it over his radar scope. So now, when the picture lined up with the transparency was the time when we should fire. So he was we had the skipper on the bridge, the helmsman below him, and the engineman below him, and the radar man. And the 5th man fired the rockets. And that dubious distinction was mine. I got to do the firing. Well, somehow, in some sort of convoluted logic, they figured the rockets are fired electrically. McDonnell is an electrician, therefore. I think it was a cop-out myself. At any rate, to fire these rockets, what I had to do, it was like a lineman's harness that I had to hook myself in and hook down to the bulkhead. And every time you pulled one of those switches, the whole place would be engaged in flame. And even though we had the portholes and the doors dogged down as tight as we could, it still came through, and you still felt pressure every time you pulled the switch. And there were 24 main switches. There were some ranging switches, but there were 24 main. And so when we got into it, here I am, I'm strapped in around target, and the captain says, fire ranging salvos. We had ranging salvos that were way up in front that we could verify our target. He said, fire ranging salvos 1 through 4. I go click, 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 click. Nothing. Nothing happens. Well, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, I had checked that system out very, very thoroughly. That system worked. The only thing that was different was that up in his little box up there, he had an abort switch that, if you were going to fire on a destroyer or something like that, he could stop you by shutting off the whole system. When he climbed in, he had put the switch in the off position, and then he forgot to put it back. And here he's in there and saying, fire, and nothing happens. So finally I screamed over as soon as I, realized, I said, throw the goddamn switch, throw. Oh, and he throws the switch, and all 4 salvos go off at one time. So now I get into the firing, one after another, and the ship is shaking, there's steam, and there's flame, and there's smoke, and it's coming inside, even though it's closed. And I complete it, and I mean, my job is done. Now, the significant thing is that we were not fired on once. We were not, the guns were there, and we were not fired on. Now, the commander he was on Green Beach with his boat, and he had the same thing. We were not fired upon by the German shore batteries. And it was well after the war that I found out why. On the beach, on Easy Red Beach, there was a German division on anti-invasion maneuvers. I think it was the 352nd. And the German general had instructed his gunners not to fire at the ships while they were at sea. He said, first, you're shooting at a moving target and you're increasing your probabilities of missing. He said, second, he said, you'll expose your own position on the shore. And there's big ships right offshore. We were right behind us, half a mile behind us was the cruiser Augusta. And he said, you'll expose your position when you fire to these big guys that are out there, and they'll do a number on you very quickly as soon as they see the puff of smoke. He said, furthermore, when the landing craft comes up on the beach, they drop that bow door, which means that you can shoot right inside them rather than shoot at a 2-inch steel ramp that's out in front of them. So here they are, they're training and elevating on us, and we're coming right into the beach, and they're waiting, they're going to drop the Haktum, we dropped the bow door, and we blow them to pieces. We never dropped the bow door, our bow door was welded closed. We got in there to the beach, we fired, and we ran like hell. Now, we're backing out, okay? And the assault wave is coming in. So here they come in, and we're backing out at the same time. Now you can imagine these young guys that are in this small boats going in. They're 29th Division. And you can imagine that here come some people, they were in there and they're on their way back and they're getting out. So what they did, they all cheered us. You know, they were waving and cheering and so forth as we went by. They were not nearly as fortunate as we were, not nearly as fortunate. We next went out, and we sought the comparative safety behind the Augusta. You know, I mean, we're going out. And again, here we are in the same type thing. We're steaming by. Here we are in the Navy, a little ship with 17 men and 2 officers, and we're going by this marvelous capital ship. And everybody on the deck comes out and they start, yeah, way to go. You know, again, we've been in there and we're back out. Well, now keep in mind that up to this point, we had seen very little of the invasion. First it was dark, and then we were busy. Now, on the way out, a couple of things. There were people in the water, and I'm not talking about bodies or anything. I'm talking about guys in rafts that were just sitting around on the 50-yard line watching the show. These were the underwater demo teams, the people that had gone in before the invasion. Their job was done before the invasion started, and they were waiting to be picked up. And they had specific ships. They weren't going to be picked up randomly. They had specific ships that had the duty of doing this. So we passed them right by. Just another recollection that I had of this that I've never seen anywhere. It's not significant. The water was filled with jellyfish. All these purple globs were all over, probably brought up because of the work of the underwater demo guys. The water was filled with it. There were some ships foundering, washed as on the shore, sideways. There was a panoramic view, the like of which is totally incomprehensible. That many ships and that many. So much activity going on simultaneously. There was there were very little aircraft. There was no aircraft activity on that day. the air war was over. I mean, the air boys brought the Germans up in the sky and kicked the hell out of them. So there had very little left to defend, you know, when we got to the invasion. Well, two German planes came by. I mean, they're just little, I mean, look, I don't know, they didn't look like big, you know, fighting aircraft. But the two of them came by. And if you can imagine 5,000 ships let go with all of their aircraft, all of their artillery, everything in the world. It's the only thing that, and everybody is aiming at these two little Germans. They sailed right straight through, never got hit. And we got orders, don't fire at any more ships under any circumstances. Just don't do it. I mean, because there probably are. You will recall that, a lot of you will, that this was the first time that there was the three stripes, the black and white stripes on the underside of the wings of the planes. It was the first time it was ever seen, so that the Germans didn't have time to, you know, to counter it by putting up fake planes themselves. At any rate, we watched, and one of the things, the most significant thing that we saw, while we're on the 50-yard, our job for the moment is finished, and we're on the 50-yard line, we're seeing all this. Off to our right was Point du Hoc, and this is where the Rangers scaled these hills and went up to the top, and we could actually see them going up. See, they went in at 7:30, and we're done. I mean, we're with our run. We watched them going up. You could see the Germans, I mean, on the top with guns shooting down at them, and these guys going up. If you ever go to Normandy, you must see Point du Hoc. You must go and see it, because it's the most incredible thing. You can't help but say, how in the world did human beings do this? How could they go up there? But they did. Now we, as I say, we're enjoying, not enjoying, but watching, you know, totally overcome with the panorama of what's taking place. And word came that things were going badly on the shore, and that we should prepare to make another run on the beach. This is on Red Beach, where they were hidden down at the water's edge, at the seawall, which is just off. Now, for our own crew to reload, it takes about 8 hours. And so we cried for help, and they sent people. I don't know where they got them, but they sent a lot of people. There was only one problem. From the first run, we had misfires. There was 15 or 20 misfires out in the wrecks. Now, this is kind of a delicate situation. And again, being the electrician, guess who got to take them out? It was a job I couldn't do alone. And the rocket, people have I mean, you know, you talk about the size and the weight. The rocket is about 4.5 foot long. The front half is the dynamite charge. The last half is the propellant, which in this case was cordite. Now, people, when you say a 5-inch shell, unless somebody has somewhat of a familiarity with it, you have no real concept, or many people have no real concept of what a 5-inch shell is. This is how big around a 5-inch shell is, with the measurement being diameter of 5 inches. Now this is what we had, these 4.5 foot jobs with all on the deck. We had between 15 and 20 misfires. We had to get out. Now, at the front of the rocket is a detonating fuse. I have 2 of them here. Now this fuse consists of, there's a cap of fulminate of mercury that's attached to this little pin in here, and there is a pin on the outside that is like a pin on a hand grenade. When that pin is removed, this will explode on contact with paper. Now, we never tested that. I don't know whether they're talking about thick paper or thin paper. It didn't apply to the general. Now, you would say that the logical thing to do would have been to reach up in and unscrew these fuses and go. I mean, to take them out separately. However, these were British. I mean, everything we had was British. The British had rigged some of the fuses so that if you tried to take them apart, they would explode. I mean, you know, in case there's a dummy on the beach, if somebody goes up and tries to take the pin, they get blown up. The problem was that they failed to tell us which ones would explode. So we had to get them out. We had to take the whole rocket out. Now, I had rigged a device to pull these things out of the racks. It was a broomstick, and on the end of it I had an elongated U-shaped piece of corrugated metal. Or not corrugated, but galvanized metal. So you reach down into the rack, hook this over the tail fin of the rocket, then pull it up, pointed directly toward my most valuable possession, and then until you could get your hand on it, and then you take it out by hand and hand it over to the side to my associate who would lower it into the water. So we did this with all of them that were on there, and we put them in the water. And we started to make our second run on the beach. We were actually in firing position, and I was strapped back in my little old harness when there was a breakthrough on the beach, and the men had gone beyond the point where we were needed, okay? So they called our mission off. We went back out to the transport area, and we stayed there for 3 days in the off chance that we might be needed again in case there was a retreat or something of that nature. And at the end of 3 days, they said our services were no longer needed, and we returned to the United Kingdom. Now, from our own firing of the ship was beat. The electrical system was burned out, the paint was gone. It's a riveted ship, and the rivets had come apart, and it was leaking badly, and I mean, it was a wreck. Just, I mean, not that the enemy had done anything to us, but just the sheer firing this many shells in such a short time had done a terrible job on the ship. So, back to England we go, and they put us right into dry dock. What are they doing this for? The invasion's over. Why are we going into dry dock? We're done. They fixed the ship as quickly as they could. We put to sea, and we went to Africa, to Mers el Kabir in Africa. We went from there up to Naples, from Naples to Corsica, and from Corsica we went on the invasion of southern France. And we did approximately the same thing. It was not of the magnitude of, you know, the previous one, but it was approximately the same thing. We then went, by now the ship is bad. I mean, it's real bad. It's not, the water is, we're taking water faster than the pumps, the bilge pumps can handle it. And the ship is sinking. I mean, as I say, it's nice, but I mean, we had nothing to do with it. We never were shot at by the enemy, you know. We're sinking. So we abandoned it. We left it. And we went, an LCI picked us up, and we went back to Africa, to Oran. And we were there for a few weeks, and they loaded us onto a transport, the General Meigs. And we went to sea. And we were at sea for 12 days. Nobody knew where we were going, or what was going on. We just, there we were, and we were out. And I think it was the 12th day we were at sea, and I'm an early riser. I got up early one morning, and I went out on deck, and I could see land off in the distance. And an older man, a ship's company on the General Meigs was coming by. And I said, hey, what is that over there? He said, that's the coast of New Jersey. You're home. we pulled into New York City. He said, we're going to New York. We pulled into New York City. Now, this is 1944. There's still a lot of war going on. We went into New York City, and every tug in the city came out and with the plumes escorted us in right by the Statue of Liberty. Most thrilling moment of my whole life. We went to Pier 90, the very pier we had left from the year before. And it seemed that the entire city of New York came out to welcome us. Okay? So then we got a 30-day leave and went to another school, went to Charleston, South Carolina, got on another rocket ship and took it out to the Pacific. We went through the canal out to Pearl, and from there on to Anahuac and the outward islands, ready to go and do the same thing again in Japan. I don't think there's any doubt that there's no way that we could have, with what we were doing and what the Japanese had planned for us, there's no way that we could have survived it. At least this is what every man aboard felt. So when they dropped the bomb and ending the war, we were, of course, ecstatic because it was a reprieve. So we did all this, and we then returned to Pearl, back to San Diego, where a few months later I got discharged, went home, and started college. And I did all this before I was 21 years old. That's all I got for today.
Any questions anybody might have, Jerry?
How big was your ship?
Repeat?
How long and wide?
On what?
The ship.
How big?
The ship was, it was 150 feet long and about 28 feet wide. Flat bottom, square front. Really, they should, they euphemistically call that a craft. Somebody, some PR man, and it's a barge. I mean, that's what they called it originally. It was barges, and that's what it was. It was a landing barge. Simple as that. Anything else?
Jerry, I just, I was on 401, you were on 408. It was the LSM converted with the deck over with the automatic rockets. It was entirely different on the 401.
Oh, the difference was light years. Light
They
years.
had 5-inch shells with about that long, but they had the spiral tubes.
Yeah.
You could put 5,000 of those out 7 miles in a space as big as this building.
Yeah.
They're very, very accurate. The thing I always wish we'd had is when I saw the orders that we were going in on Orange Beach, and I always wish we had a Xerox machine that invented then we could have copied that. I actually saw the orders where we were supposed to go in on.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I would be very interested in seeing something like that.
I got a picture of the 401 here if anybody wants to see.
Yeah, I saw that before. Mine was in 408.
Right.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Might be interesting to know that we have a person in this group today that was a worker at Oak Ridge on the Manhattan Project.
Oh, very good.
And she got a certificate from Secretary of War after the bomb was dropped. First time she knew that they were working. Okay, stand up.
On that, I think the words of Winston Churchill regarding the use of the bomb are appropriate. He said, the opposition to the use of the atomic bomb has come mainly from those that had no intention of proceeding to the front themselves.
Jerry, I'd like to make one comment. You talked about didn't fire on you when you come in. You're right. Because when I was in on the beach there on D-Day, when the LCTs and all those crafts come in and laid their gate down for the tanks and things to come off, that's when the 88s come in.
Zoom right through them.
They were knocking them out just like that.
Yeah.
I stood there and watched.
Yeah, so really, I might say that I owe my life to some German general.
Right. It was smart what they
He
done.
knew,
because
he
it
knew
was-
what we had done in the Dark River to those ships, and so he let us go.
Jerry, we'd like you to have this much coveted World War II round table paperweight.
Thank you.
Before you go, Doug Wilma has an announcement in regard to maybe we can hopefully get an American flag that we can have for ourselves. Would you talk about that a minute, Doug?
Yeah, the Woodsmen of the World give out more American flags than anybody except the Uncle Sam. And recently they gave one to our airborne chapter here in town, and it's a beautiful thing. And I'm just wondering if we have any Woodsmen of the World members in this group. If we do, they put in a good word for us to get a flag for this group. It's really a...
Okay, thank you. Could we now stand for our benediction, please? Elliot?
Truly, Lord God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here this day. Go with us and be with us as we make our way home. In your name we pray.
I'm going to call you. I'll call you at the beginning of